Well, Michigan State University's renowned College of Education has a new leader. It's Jerlando F. Jackson, who is also an MSU Foundation Professor of Education now that he's arrived at MSU, and it's a real treat to welcome him to the first time to MSU Today. Welcome, Dean Jackson.
Delighted to be here, and thank you for having me.
Let's start a little bit with give our listeners a little sense of who you are, just a little bit of your background leading up to your time now here in East Lansing.
Sure. Again, thank you for having me. I have been at land-grant institutions for 26 years now. In the last 22 of those, I've been at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I started my trajectory on the professorate as an assistant professor there in the School of Education, in the Department of Education, Leadership, and Policy Analysis. During my time there, I was fortunate enough to sort of move through the ranks, as most faculty like to, and ultimately became a full professor. And then received a named professorship about 12 years into my career. And then shortly thereafter, I launched my research laboratory, Wisconsin's Equity and Inclusion Laboratory, which is still going now there. But the work looked largely at workforce diversity, workplace discrimination challenges. We sort of tackled equity and inclusion issues at large in the scientific workforce, and we held convenings across the globe, as well as far as some of the research that went on there. Concurrently, I was able to within that work, take on some interesting university service roles that sort of broadened my portfolio. For about 8 years, I sat on the athletic board at the university, which is a shared governance entity that provides actual oversight for our athletic department. And it was very enlightening and quite rewarding work to do. The last 6 of those 8 years, I served as the chair of the Human Resource Committee, which provided oversight to the hiring, to the annual reviews of the coaches. And in those last 6 years, too, I was faculty oversight for football, which meant I spent a considerable amount of time with that staff, the coaches, the transition, the hiring, and the having sort of the responsibility for student athlete welfare component. So my role and the athletic board's role was not for wins or losses, but to ensure that the welfare of the students was well taken care of on the field and off the field, and that was a really nice experience. Toward the end of my 22 years there, I was honored to receive a second honorific and had awarded an endowed professorship. And so I had the endowed professor and endowed professor chair role. Those two, it was nice to have that sort of distinction. But most rewardingly was I took on the responsibility of being department chair. And that experience allowed me to carry on in traditions of other department chairs that came before me that provided really solid stewardship, sound decision-making, careful consideration for what the future might bring. And that was a really nice experience, and I'll full circle this. So in doing that work as department chair, it reconnected me with an early career interest, and that was decanal work or the work of being a dean. My dissertation, ironically, studied education deans, and a good bulk of the work I did in the very beginning of my career, I studied academic deans, particularly education deans, the role and function of associate assistant deans, and just the structuring of colleges of education. But I abandoned that original interest of maybe being a dean just because I fell in love with research, discovery, working with students, setting them on the pathway for their dreams. And quite frankly, it was hard to envision any job better than being a faculty member. So I didn't feel bad about initially abandoning my idea because I fell in love with something that just seemed hard to compete with. But once I took on the department chair role and recognized this kind of reconnected with my original interest and some of my natural proclivities, I shifted my vision back and made that internal commitment.
Well, Dr. Jackson, what an interesting background, and it sounds like you were very entrenched and valuable in Madison. You mentioned the land grant mission is important to you. What attracted you now to come to MSU?
Sure. Well, I'll start right there. Michigan State really is the prototype for what land grants were built on, and to sort of be at the epicenter for the commitment to the roles and functions that a state should give to its citizens from a post-secondary education opportunity just seemed very opportune, as well as the spirit of hard-working nature of Michigan State. As I was preparing for my visits and my interviews and given the opportunity to read and learn more about the history of this institution, what stood out to me was this hard-working notion in the DNA. And when you read and learn that it was a part of the original students' curriculum, that they actually worked every day as a part of going to school, that long ago, just shows that this is a place that is hardworking about providing access, but it's access to excellence. And Michigan State would be one of those jewel of institutions that has access points across the spectrum, but still puts you on an amazing arc toward excellence.
Talk a little bit more, and I know it's like a father doesn't want to choose one child over another, but talk about some of the excellence in the College of Education at MSU.
That's another reason I showed up here, because as you dig deep and you do a deep dive in the College of Education, it's an amazingly well-positioned college. What stands out initially, I give you some top level and go a little further, but what stood out to me was, as I was interviewing, and I think even still to today, is the college has 5 number one programs, another 3 in the top 10, but many were top 5. Then there was another one that's top 15, and then another one top 25. I mean, if you look at that, that's very hard to replicate across the landscape, to produce programs that are that competitive and highly regarded among their colleagues in that particular way. Some of the areas that I'll say a little bit about, let me begin with spaces you may know less about. It's often and unfortunately the case that some of our constituents may not realize that kinesiology is in education. And that is a top 25 program. It's amazing, the spirit, When you think about a Spartan's wheel, all you got to do is go spend some time with them. And I was fortunate enough, just with the timing of this, is I was there for yesterday morning and going around and meeting and touring the facilities, the research laboratories. It is amazing that in the College of Education, we have research. We got wet labs, right? You don't think of a wet lab in a College of Education, but we have wet labs in the College of Education, not only in kinesiology, but also in Create for STEM. So we do have a very interesting footprint outside of the scope of education. But in kinesiology, they are conducting research on motor skills, on babies, to our aging populations, to testing on mice as well. And these are not things that you typically would think of. And this is happening in kinesiology, along with athletic training and sports leadership that you would think of. But it is an amazingly robust space there. And then we have our usual suspects that you hear about all the time. The college has we've got highly regarded programs that teach related to teaching education, having peer reviewed as number one for 28 years. That is a significant distinction that we all should be proud to be associated with because of the role and function that it plays. But we also are highly ranked in the department, being ed admin, that prepares principals, supervisors, superintendents, leaders in higher education. We're highly regarded there as well. Curriculum and instruction falls within teacher education, but has a unique footprint. We do very well in rehabilitation psychology, counseling, in that it's highly regarded on a regular basis as well. And then education psychology, education policy. We play a very important role in the state as it relates to the role and function with K-12 policy. And that's a distinction that we certainly are proud of. And then, special education is a gem of a contribution to schools, parents who are looking for strong partners and ensuring that their children are given as best a shot as possible, great opportunities in life. And we have those and a host of other areas that are mainstays. I should say that there are two other spaces that you might not typically associate with education that I've been pleasantly surprised. And I shouldn't say two, but let me give you three. So the first is urban education. That many decades ago there was a College of Urban Affairs that at least had that focus area, and as that college disbanded, College of Education was one of the places where that footprint became a very important space. And so we have a strong and growing area there in urban education, which you might not typically think about for us. And then global education is another, that the size and scope of projects that the college has across the world is amazing. You wouldn't know it easily from the outside without paying special attention, because the college has been pretty intentional about vertically integrating that emphasis across all programs. And so the number of USAID grants that are coming into the college and that will appears to be an arc of excellence for us. Amazing. And then our partnerships in STEM education, unique relationships with NatSci as an example, natural sciences. We have some joint centers, joint positions, joint efforts that it's just a really pleasant, partnership that strengthens both of our colleges in very unique ways.
This is MSU Today. I'm Russ White talking with Jerlando Jackson, MSU's College of Education Dean. And a two-part question, sir. Tell me a little bit more about your own research interests. I understand you're credited with coining the term organizational disparities, but also as a busy dean, will you even have time to still explore your research interests?
Well, the last question I can answer much easier than the first, and that is, I hope. Yeah. But yes, I've conducted research that has looked at what we think of as organizational disparities broadly, in the sense that inherently most organizations, not all, do find themselves to have consistent set of disparities that groups have been sort of subjected to across decades. And so the projects that we've launched has looked at glass ceiling effects, for example, for women and people of color, where we've looked at upward mobility challenges in general, but particularly as it looks at breaking through the glass ceiling, and in what ways is it more difficult, and what might be some mitigating factors to make it to those top positions, right? We've also looked at hiring practices, whether they were equitable, or they taken into non-job related factors, and so hiring practices in higher education in general. We've looked at them in the science domain, and we also have a project called a National Study in Collegiate Athletics, which looks at hiring practices in athletic departments. And you probably thinking, well, why is that relevant? The hiring in many athletic departments, and universities for that fact, at the uppermost levels, search firms are how those hires are conducted, and that provides a layer of kind of like a buffering of information, where you may not have a full understanding of who's considered or how one gets to the next stage. And so there's just a lot you don't know, right? That I'm here through a search firm process, and there's a lot. Typically, there's engagement among the college, and there's some visibility at stages of the search process. But that's not always the case when you look at certain domains in athletics. Is oftentimes, because the nature of how those hires have to occur, speed is of the essence. Stealth is of the essence, and so having some sort of understanding that there's some equitable opportunities is fundamental to that particular project.
Yeah. I know you're just getting started, Dean Jackson, but have you thought about some short-term goals and then maybe some longer-term goals for the college? And I understand there's already a fabulous strategic planning process underway that you want to enhance. So just talk a little bit about your plans for the college.
Sure. What I am prepared to talk about is, and you've started it for me, that the institution has, engaged in a strategic planning process, and all of the colleges have done likewise. And our college is similar. And it's just sort of been staged in the sense that a good number of discussions occurred last year. There's some planning documents in place. There's some ideation there, and we're right at the precipice of taking that and reconvening those groups to sort of solidify the College of Education implementation plan. What I will say is there's sort of some key aspects for how I'm thinking about bringing leadership to the college and this wonderful opportunity in front of us of putting together our implementation plan in alignment with the greater strategic plan. And that is first anchoring what the college does well. And, just like there are anchor stores and malls, there's anchors too in, important organizations. And in this one, you've got these top rated academic programs that I spoke about. Like those are anchors. Like we've got to protect those. We've got to invest in those. And then I've also spoke about, opportunities for those particular programs. But we've also got professors with important and critical honorifics, like they're in the National Academies of Education, some in science of their particular fields, and they're fellows in their critical research associations. And so those are individuals, and that's a space for which we want to continue to recruit individuals because that's an anchor for the college. And then we've got just some, amazing high-performing research centers and institutes, that those forms the anchors for us, and they require protection, they require investments. Then we have spaces we can optimize, right? We've got a lot of number one programs, right? The other ones may want to be number one too, right? And whether they get there or not is really not the main objective, but it is to ensure that all of our programs feel appropriately supported and feel well positioned to be competitive in the work that the faculty wants to do, but competitive for students, but also a source of pride for our alum to be able to point to as well. And then we've got just a number of opportunities to sort of reinforce our online master's programs that have been well received, well regarded throughout the years. This college was one of the first to enter into that space. And then we've got these, and I mentioned a little bit about these interdisciplinary collaborations. It's an area for us to potentially broaden because College of Education that are interdisciplinary tends to create very robust research partnerships, research outcomes, and then our students are the greatest beneficiaries for creating that sort of a culture of environment there. And then the college does have a history of being engaged in the communities. We've got an outstanding K-12 outreach unit, and they are poised to want to do more. And I think the institution would like to see the college engaged more broadly across the state and beyond, and we want to position ourselves to be able to do that. And then within our strategic plan and our discussions, we're going to identify some areas where we want to be first, that will be new, that would sort of aggregate where we're going and where we think we should be. And that's the beauty of being able to pick this planning process back up, take stock of where we are, anchor the important pieces, optimize opportunities to sort of reinforce the other areas that we have going on in our college and desires, and then dream, right? Are there spaces where we can be first? And are there areas that education needs to be that is not quite there that will prepare this college for the next 50 years or more? So that's what's coming as we go into the fall semester. Faculty should be re-energized and ready to pick it up again.
Any particular, you started to answer it, but challenges and opportunities along the way as you pursue these goals?
I think our challenges, we'll have to be creative and understand how we're going to pay for some of the efforts that we want to do. I imagine we'll have to be creative about program revenues. We'll probably have to be creative about fundraising, development, and we'll have to develop a set of compelling arguments, right, to senior leadership to invest in this vision as well. And so, I think that this college is poised. We've got individuals ready to act, and so this is going to be exciting.
Great colleges don't rest on their laurels. They're always trying to get better. I can sense that from you. And, one last question, Dean Jackson, more from your 30,000-foot view is an education in general. It could be something in K-12 or higher. I'm just wondering, what are you kind of hopeful about in our education future? And maybe is there something that keeps you up at night? Yeah.
Well, there are a number of things keep me up at night that I can tell you. But let me start there. As we are managing much better our position in this pandemic, it has heightened some areas of weaknesses that we've got to be prepared for. And not just in education, but just as a country, as a world. And so there's going to be some economic fallout from COVID-19 for quite some time, where we've got to find our economic footing again. And there are large parts of education in schools and K-12 that they are not revenue centers. And so as the economy has taken a downturn, that means those public entities that rely on, dollars that are coming from, cities and governments and federal agencies will not have as they had in the past. And, that's something we've got to figure out how to deal with, right? Because most of our schools, K-12 schools, are not revenue generating, right? They require revenue to be inputted in them. And so that's something we have to understand. As colleges, there's greater demands for us to be clear about career pathways for our graduates, as we are trying to attract students who will become our alum. There are questions about where are my career pathways, and are they all solely in education? Are there pathways outside of education? What happens if I have a change in desirability, and is this degree have value in the open marketplace? And just us being able to communicate that, create these interdisciplinary partnerships where the skill sets are transferable, clearly transferable, in ways that our graduates can communicate, we can communicate, is going to be really important. Also during the time frame of the pandemic, we did run through a time in our country where race was kind of front and center. And so many of our schools and organizations are still wrestling with and trying to understand how to sort of be responsive to the racial climate that sort of bubbled up not to suggest it wasn't there before, but it became, a top of mind, top of agenda items. And as a College of Education, we are important we're an important partner with our schools to be of assistance in how to manage that, right? How do you get a handle of and understand the racial climate in your schools, and how might you go about addressing that? And I think we'll be asked to do more of that. I think we're going to be asked to be role models of that, right? Not just say, hey, you do a job to respond to the parents and to communities to address that. But as a college, we've got to be in a position to say and show the ways in which we've done that as well. And then also just to, maybe speak to some degree about remote work. So remote work is, I think, is a part of the way we're going to do business going forward, right? And with that being the case, education is a large employment sector in post-secondary education, higher education, 2-year colleges, 4-year colleges, K-12 schools, private school, public schools. Like, that is a large footprint that's going to be wrestling with remote learning, remote teaching, remote work. And to the extent we can be an asset there would be great. But we, too, have to understand how we're going to manage that process as well. So where all the hope is in we've got amazing faculty, staff, and students. We attract students that come from a full spectrum of backgrounds, a full spectrum of experiences, and they get inside the College of Education portal. And in that portal, the direction and the destination is the same. To take you to help you realize the excellence in your education and career that you find most desirable with our support. And when you get inside this portal, it may be that we help you think about some pathways you didn't. But once our students graduate and they become alum, they are part of the family, right? And we've got to have a constitution that it's important to us that once you're in the College of Education family, that you're in it. And so that's what's really refreshing to me, that in my short period of time, the college makes it work. The faculty, staff, and students, they make it work. They may not have all the right tools, they may not have all the right parts, but when they're done, it works. And so I'm just so excited to, be able to lead a group of individuals that can figure out how to make it work, even in tough times like we've just gone through, and in some cases still in. But battle tested, ready to go, and there's no better example of an oncoming wheel than coming to the College of Education.
Spartans will, Dean Jackson. It's been great to meet you and talk with you today. I really sense your passion for leading what's already a great college to its next great adventures. And just as we close, summarize what you'd like those joining in on our conversation to know about you and the college moving forward.
Well, if you haven't had a chance to look at the College of Education, I just say, do look at what this college has done. You have a significant, tremendous crown jewel here that deserves some, the recognition and support that it has warranted, not only locally but across the state and the nation and globe. There's some efforts in place so that we can ensure that the work that has gone into getting to this place in time is secured, and that we're thinking very responsibly about the future with a keen eye toward the beneficiaries being our graduates and the state and the localities that count on the College of Education to be a strong partner with them.
And the place to go to check out what Dr. Jackson is talking about, simply education.msu.edu. And again, Dean Jackson, thank you so much for coming on the program today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
That's Michigan State University College of Education Dean Jerlando F. Jackson. He's also an MSU Foundation Professor of Education. If you want to follow along on Twitter, it's Dr. JFL Jackson, DRJFL Jackson on Twitter. And I'm Russ White. This is MSU Today.